Welcome back to CBS This Morning, Saturday. Yesterday, the Minneapolis Police Department, from which 4 officers were fired in the death of George Floyd, announced it was banning the use of chokeholds and neck restraints. All week, we've seen protesters around the country calling for a change in police practices and an end to the bias that leads to racial profiling. Some are hoping this could be a watershed moment in that long battle.
If we don't get no justice, we don't get no peace.
Standard operating procedure is under fire.
No justice! No peace!
As protesters demand police reform across the country.
It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks.
Eulogizing George Floyd on Thursday, the Reverend Al Sharpton called this a defining new chapter in the decades-long civil rights movement.
Another era we had to fight Jim Crow. Another era we dealt with voting rights. This is the era to deal with policing and criminal justice.
Yet the recent deaths of unarmed black Americans, from Ahmaud Arbery to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, are a black eye on the road to reform.
I was dismayed, and I felt, what about the progress that we have been seeing over the years since Ferguson?
A lot of our work is going to involve local police chiefs.
George Mason University professor Lori Robinson was a co-chair of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, created following the unrest over the 2014 death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The task force focused on 6 pillars of policing, including building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, officer training and education, and officer safety and wellness.
Is the answer at the state or at the local level?
Over 30 states have passed different measures to address problems in the area of policing, different policing reforms, and numerous localities in their police departments have adopted different measures. Much more clearly needs to be done, but the state and local side is where action has to occur.
But that takes recognizing that reform is needed.
Policing is unfair.
Frank Baumgartner wrote the 2018 book Suspect Citizens, analyzing 22 million traffic stops over 20 years in just one state, North Carolina. We spoke following the high-profile deaths of Philando Castile in Minnesota, Walter Scott in South Carolina, and Sandra Bland in Texas.
Get out of the car!
All died after being pulled over by police.
It made me realize that people are not making stuff up.
The data is clear. It shows in North Carolina that African Americans had been stopped twice as often as white drivers, and while they were 4 times more likely to be searched, were actually less likely to be issued a ticket. The study also highlighted that whites were more likely to be found with contraband than blacks or Hispanics. So essentially, if you are underrepresented in someone's mind as a participating citizen, your rights are up for grabs?
You're viewed as a criminal suspect.
That data was undeniable to Chapel Hill Police Chief Chris Blue. Is it inherent bias?
I'm not sure I know what it is. Police agencies are trying to think very hard about what policies and interventions they can put in place that might help balance out some of those disparities that were found in the work.
Blue has implemented reforms in his own department, de-emphasizing the low-level kind of traffic enforcement that the numbers really show have a disproportionate effect on communities of color. Has it really had an impact on your ability to fight crime?
No, I don't think so. For years, citations and arrests were a measure of success. What we thought was effective policing was maybe not achieving the things we thought it would.
Still, it's an uphill battle, as Chief Blue acknowledged in a video he posted Monday on Facebook.
We must start saying loudly that we won't continue to tolerate the behaviors of officers or agencies that damage what we've built.
Not all law enforcement officers agree.
And the handcuffing and oppression of police was despicable.
Last year, Lieutenant Bob Kroll of the Minneapolis Police Officers Federation praised the Trump administration's hands-off approach to oversight.
This was incredible bipartisan support.
While the president signed the First Step Act in 2018, a landmark prison and sentencing reform law that released more than 3,100 nonviolent offenders serving time in federal prisons,
Please don't be too nice.
he's voiced his commitment to law and order, something both he and his chief law enforcement officer, Attorney General William Barr, agree on.
And if communities don't give that support and respect, they may find themselves without the police protection they need.
That hasn't stopped millions from pouring into the streets, from the nation's capital to New York City to North Dakota. And while there have been skirmishes and animosity remains, some police officers have joined in the marches, even taking a knee.
Are you hopeful that in 1 to 5 years from now we won't see this happening all over again?
It's an enormous tragedy, but I am hopeful that the attention to it will cause enough people to focus on the need for action.
And that is Lori Robinson's point that reforms in both cities, big and small, are taking place. It just needs to be taking place more often in more places.
Yeah, and Michelle, there's something to hearing that same messaging, that it has to take place on the local level. You have to admit that you have issues in order to change them. So important and such a great piece.